Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Mark Winger? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. So first I'll look at the background in this case. I'll move to the timeline of the crimes, then offer my analysis. Mark Winger was born in Ohio on November 26, 1962. In 1988, he married Donna Winger. The couple moved to Springfield, Illinois, where he worked as a nuclear power plant technician, and she worked as an operating room technician. The couple wanted to have children, but Donna was unable, so they adopted a girl named Bailey. Many people who knew the couple believed they were happy. They viewed them as the ideal couple. At some point, Mark started an affair with a woman named Deanne Schultz. She was a friend of Donna's. On August 23, 1995, Donna and her 3-year-old daughter, Bailey, took a shuttle from St. Louis, Missouri to Springfield, Illinois, to their residence. The driver of the vehicle was a man named Roger Harrington. According to Donna, Roger said a number of unusual things on the trip. A spirit named Dom would appear to him. Sometimes when he was driving, a godlike character would come to him and pull him out of his body. Talk about inconvenient timing. Roger also expressed an interest in having sex with Donna and talked about using drugs. He drove the van erratically, causing Donna to fear for her life. When Roger dropped Donna off at her house, she informed her husband about his bizarre behavior and the terrifying journey. Her husband encouraged her to write down what happened so they could file a complaint. Before we get to the timeline of the crime, let's hear a word from today's sponsor, Audible. Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment. They have an extensive selection of audiobook titles and other products. We see genres like military history, science fiction, mystery, and of course, true crime. One resource that I used to prepare for my video on the Susan Powell case was the audiobook titled, If I Can't Have You. It offers a great description of the troubled relationship Powell had with her husband for some time before her disappearance. It was a shocking reminder of the dangers of manipulation in romantic relationships. Cold-Blooded was an audiobook I used for my video on the murder of Larry McNabney. This was an unusual case of impersonation, greed, arrogance, callousness, and the cost of shallow romance. One lesson of this story is how in relationships where each person is using the other, disaster is only a hair's breadth away. In my line of work, I have to keep up with new criminal cases and disappearances. Audiobooks on Audible allow me to stay productive. Learning resources are never far away, and they are easy to access. I can download audiobooks when I have access to the internet and listen to the titles offline when I have the time. Visit audible.com/Dr. Grande or text Dr. Grande to 500-500 to get started with your free trial. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On August 29, 1995, Mark Winger called the police and reported that an intruder had attacked his wife with a hammer. He shot the intruder. He mentioned that there was a bullet in the intruder's head. During the 911 call, Mark claimed that he heard his daughter Bailey crying, even though no crying could be heard on the recording. He told the dispatcher he needed to hang up for a moment and attend to her. Here's what the police found at Mark's house when they arrived. Roger Harrington was on the floor with 2 bullets in his head. He would not survive. Donna Winger was also on the floor, not far from Roger. She had died from brain trauma. It is believed a hammer was the murder weapon. Roger Harrington's vehicle was parked on the street in front of the house in the wrong direction. There was a note on the seat of his vehicle that read, Mark Winger, 2305 Westview Drive, Springfield, 4:30. This was Mark's address, and the time that Mark called 911 was 4:27 p.m. Roger Harrington's cigarettes and cup were on the table in the house. Here was Mark Winger's story to the police. He said that Roger Harrington had been harassing them. He complained to the shuttle service, obtained Roger's phone number, and called him. Mark told him he would not file a police report if Roger just left them alone. Mark told the police that he was exercising on a treadmill in the basement when he heard a thump upstairs. He came upstairs and saw his daughter alone on the bed, something that Donna would never do. He then heard Donna calling for help. He retrieved his .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol, walked out into the living room, and confronted Roger Harrington, who was standing over his wife holding a hammer. It was clear that he had struck her several times. Mark warned him to discontinue his attack, but Roger tilted his head down as if he was preparing to strike Donna with the hammer again. Mark shot Roger in the top of the head. Roger tried to get up after being shot. Mark shot him again in the forehead. The police were satisfied with Mark's explanation, and the case was closed. Mark made some unusual statements to Deanne. I will talk about these in the analysis. The statements led Deanne to believe that Mark had orchestrated the situation to commit murders. Deanne was not coping well with this knowledge. She was being treated by a mental health professional for depression, suicidal thoughts, and headaches. The clinician told her she needed to tell the police what she knew. In February of 1999, Deanne went to the police and told them about her suspicions. She was granted immunity for her testimony against Mark Winger. Mark Winger was charged in connection with the murders and would be convicted in May of 2002. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mark was not going to let being in prison derail his criminal career. He crafted a plan to get out of prison. He asked another prisoner named Terry Hubble, who was serving a life sentence, to help him find an accomplice on the outside to execute his plan. Mark wanted Deanne Schultz to be kidnapped and forced to record a statement saying she lied during the trial. She would say that Mark was innocent. After she finished exonerating Mark, the killer was to murder her and make it look like a suicide. Mark wanted another person kidnapped and murdered as well, a childhood friend named Jeffrey Gelman, who Mark was mad at for refusing to post his bail of $1 million. Gelman was to be kidnapped, held for ransom, and once the ransom was paid, the accomplice was to kill Gelman and his family, also making it look like a suicide. If there was money left over, Mark wanted the perpetrator to also take out Donna's father. Mark was ordering homicides like one would order at a fast food restaurant. Can I get one single murder, one family murder, and a medium ransom? Would you like to supersize your order? Sure, why not? Interestingly, by killing all these additional people, Mark was jeopardizing his central goal of having his conviction overturned. It would look a lot less suspicious if just one person was murdered. Mark had recorded the request in a 19-page handwritten letter, and the police had recorded conversations between Mark and Terry Hubble. Mark was charged with the solicitation of murder. He said it was just a fantasy, not a real plan. He was convicted and had 35 years tacked on to his life sentence. Now, Terry Hubble, of course, was not let out of prison because he was serving life, but he was given over $3,000 for his cooperation, for helping the police to catch Mark Winger. Now moving to my analysis. Mark had two separate trials for different offenses. The murder for hire case was pretty clear, as Mark documented his entire plan. Therefore, I will focus my analysis on the murder of Donna Winger and Roger Harrington. Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that Mark Winger was guilty, starting with the inculpatory evidence. In August of 1985, Mark was talking to Deanne as they stood in his driveway. This was before the homicides. She said that Mark told her it would be easier if Donna just died. He then told her, all you have to do is come by and find the body. Deanne refused to participate, but Mark would mention this again later. She again refused to take part. The day before the homicides, Mark told Deanne about how he would like to get the shuttle bus driver, Roger Harrington, into his house. On the day of the homicides, Mark said a few different things to Deanne, including, would you love me no matter what? Stay as far away from the police as possible. Don't say anything about the affair. Later, as the two were continuing their relationship, Mark told her the murder didn't happen the way the paper said it did, and he did not want her to know what happened at the house because ignorance is bliss. Even though the investigation was closed immediately after the murders, Mark kept asking the detectives about the case, like he was trying to find out if they were still investigating, if they knew anything additional. He also asked for his pistol back, and they gave it to him. 5 months after the murder of his wife, Mark married a nanny he hired to watch his daughter. They would go on to have 3 children. They built a life together. The positions of the bodies in Mark's home were inconsistent with his description of what happened. The note with Mark's name, his address, and the time seemed like it may have been there because Roger was invited there as opposed to being an intruder. Roger's cigarettes and cup leave the same impression. There were conversations recorded between Mark and Roger demonstrating that Mark arranged the meeting on the day of the murders. It appears as though Mark hung up with 911 in order to shoot Roger Harrington a second time. Why didn't he mention 2 bullets before he disconnected the call? Now moving to the exculpatory evidence. Mark did not cause Roger Harrington's odd behavior toward Donna. So if this was a murder plot, then it was serendipitous from the point of view of Mark Winger. Roger came to Mark's house on his own power, and in theory, Roger had some motive to kill Donna Winger. Now the note that was found in Roger's vehicle, again with Mark's name, address, and the time, I mentioned this under the inculpatory portion, but I guess it could also be considered neutral, especially the name and address. If Roger wanted to harm Donna Winger, he would have to know where the house was, so it makes sense he would have written down the address. The problem is really the time, the 4:30 being written on there. Why would Roger need that? Was he planning on killing so many people that he had to organize his day? It just doesn't make sense. So again, I think that really was inculpatory more so than exculpatory. Considering all of the evidence, what are my thoughts in this case? Was Mark Winger actually guilty? I think Mark was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt and was guilty in reality. The most convincing evidence for me was the fact that he spoke to Roger and invited him to his house. It's really hard to view him as innocent when he invited Roger. It seems like he really did set this whole thing up. What type of person can commit a crime like this? I'm not aware of any mental health information available in this case. As far as personality, we see that Mark was a successful individual. He was intelligent and conscientious. People liked him. He made friends fairly easily. People viewed him as a positive figure in the community. At some point, he must have decided that he wanted a different life, one that did not include his current spouse. Perhaps he was ruminating on this from time to time. Then Roger came along. The difficulty for Mark is that before, during, and after the crime, he made a number of mistakes. Before the crime, he told his mistress he wanted his wife dead and mentioned Roger Harrington coming to the house. During the crime, he called 911 before he was sure Roger was dead. He hung up the phone to shoot him again, even though he could have just stayed on the phone because the phone is recording audio, not video. If his story was that Roger was getting up to attack him, what difference does it make if the audio was recording or not? It would be a lot less suspicious to record that second shot than to hang up the phone. Mark left Roger's cigarettes and cup on the table. He could have simply put the cigarettes in Roger's pocket. The cup becomes a little bit more complex because that wouldn't fit on Roger's person. He could have left it by the door to make it look like Roger dropped it as he came in. That's a little less suspicious than it being set on the table. The position of the bodies was an issue as well. Mark could have handled this by simply not telling the police too many details. He could have said that it was all a blur. He's not sure about where everybody was standing when he fired his weapon. After the crime, Mark made additional inculpatory statements to his mistress and was overly curious about the case with the police. Then, of course, he was convicted for that whole murder-for-hire plot that was simply ridiculous. Another element of Mark's personality that's so unusual is how he rebuilt his life with another woman. Again, he married the nanny he had hired. The fact that he murdered his wife just didn't seem to matter to him. He was fine moving on with his life. No guilt, no shame. In his mind, he deserved to be happy. So this might point to some type of narcissistic tendency. The last item I want to cover is the reaction of the police. I find it worrisome how eager the police were to believe that a person who appeared to be mentally ill must have been a killer. If not for Mark Winger's mistakes, Roger would have been thought of forever as a murderer when he was actually a victim of a cold and calculating killer. Those are my thoughts in the case of Mark Winger. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching.